Welcome to Moving with CHD, the podcast and vlog where I talk to fellow CHDers about being active with a congenital heart defect. I'm Hayley and was born with atrial ventricular septal defect and had 2 open heart surgeries by the age of 1. Growing up, I loved being active, but wanted to better understand the benefits and challenges of exercising with this condition. I'm therefore so excited to hear from others who have found their love for movement within their heart limits. Together we'll share these incredible stories and the realities of moving with CHD. However active you're able to be, I hope you find some inspiration, encouragement, and the movement you love. This week, I'm speaking to Beth, an endurance athlete who's faced numerous cardiac hurdles, but her resilience, mindset, and determination to go back to training and improve her fitness is truly inspiring. Hi Beth, thank you for joining us today on the Moving with CHD podcast. Really excited to have you on the show.
Hi Hayley, it's really great to be here. It's one of my favourite things to do is to talk to other people with CHD and to get to share my experiences, and hopefully we can all learn from each other.
Amazing. So I thought as a bit of fun, we would kick off with a quick fire round with just some random questions and give you the first thing that comes to your head.
Okay, let's do it.
All right. So your favourite Disney character?
Now I'm not really particularly a big one for Disney, but I guess I would just say Goofy because I am distinctly Goofy. So that would have to be the correct answer. And please tell me that Goofy is actually a Disney character.
Do you know what? I don't know, but let's go with it. I like it.
Never mind, let's go with it. Goofy sounds good. Yeah.
What's your spirit animal?
Elephants. Funnily enough, when I was quite young, for some reason, I decided that elephant was my favourite animal. I've no idea why. I've never seen one in the wild. I've obviously seen one in a zoo, but I started a collection of elephants. I had stuffed elephants and ebony and ivory elephants, which you're not supposed to have these days. And so elephant, and the irony there is, people always think, well, the elephant never forgets, and I've got one of the worst memories of anyone I've ever met. So hey.
Okay. If you could eat any food right now, what would it be?
Oh, now that's an interesting question. Again, I'm going to give an obtuse answer because I'm a real fan of avocados. It's one of those things that totally divides people. They think they're utterly delicious or utterly disgusting. And I'm really a big fan of the avocado.
I agree. Absolutely love an avocado. Name one thing on your bucket list.
Again, that's a bit of a challenge. I guess I'd like to travel more. And obviously in the times we're in at the moment with COVID, that's kind of difficult, but I would certainly like to see more countries. I've spent some time living overseas, but actually there's so many places I haven't been to and life is short, and I'd like to kind of expand that repertoire.
Amazing. Okay. Let's, I guess, get into the meat of it. So let's kick off with maybe if you can tell me a little bit about your congenital heart defect.
Yes, I will say to people that I have what should be a very simple defect, which has turned into a catalogue of very interesting, I wouldn't like to use the term disasters, but it's going to say on my headstone, that shouldn't have happened, which kind of covers it. So I was born fairly simply with pulmonary stenosis and an atrial septal defect. Had good care when I was a child, but sort of managed to move different parts of the country and kind of had issues with transitional care. So didn't actually have my first surgery till I was 9.5. Then really realistically bounced back fairly effectively from that. So the hole was closed and the valve was messed with, sort of fixed. I then was sort of relatively healthy, took to a very strange athletic lifestyle, partially because a consultant said to me that when I said I'd like to start running when I was about 17 or 18, and he went with very sharp intake of breath and said, well, I suppose that will be all right if you don't take up marathons. Well, that to me, unfortunately, is a bit like a red rag to a bull. So that's pretty much what I went and did within a few years. And it escalated from there. But actually, I believe that sort of higher level of fitness that I managed to attain really actually kept me healthy. And I did remarkably well. I lived and trained almost as a full-time athlete for about 8 years, lived in America and really enjoyed myself. And by a sort of stroke of luck, I suppose, it wasn't until about 6 months after I moved back to this country, that my health took a bit of a nosedive. And I had been realizing that my race results weren't as good as they had been. And I just assumed, well, I'm getting to 30 and that must be when the rot sets in for everyone when you're 30. And I didn't really sort of even consider particularly that my sort of heart condition might have something to do with the fact I was getting slower. But long story cut short, it turned out when I eventually transitioned back into having care, because I'd gone 11, 12 years without any care at all, that unfortunately it turned out I needed a pulmonary valve replacement, and that happened in 2005. And again, I went into that with a very high level of fitness. People couldn't sort of quite believe that was the situation I was in. But I ran a half marathon in a reasonably respectable time, I think about a month before. But it definitely was the right time. And I bounced back from that surgery really quite quickly and was back competing I did a triathlon 6 weeks later, which again wouldn't go on the suggested plan for cardiac rehab, but it worked for me. And again, that high level of fitness just stood me in good stead. And all was relatively simple and benign then for about another, 10 years or so. I started to have a lot of arrhythmia problems, which I think is something many other patients will understand once you've had 1 or 2 surgeries. That sort of tends to come with the package, a lot of scar tissue and things, and arrhythmia started to become a problem. But and it was fairly simple until 2016. Unfortunately, when I had an assumed to be arrhythmia-related stroke, which stole my left eye. I have basically no usable vision in my left eye any longer, which was all a bit of a shock, because all the other cardiac issues I've ever encountered, I figure that they're not too difficult to deal with on a daily basis, whereas unfortunately having sight in only one eye has had quite massive implications on my day-to-day life. I've had to adapt. I had to fight for keep my driving license, and it makes depth perception a little interesting. I can be even more klutzy than I was before, and you just have to get on. And it took me out of cycling, which is one of my big loves in life, and I really lost confidence with riding my bike and being out and about, because again I ride into potholes, and I was always worried about anybody being on my left hand side, because I have no peripheral vision at all that side until somebody kind of comes round into where the other eye can see them. I've no idea if somebody's there. So it really did kind of really knocked my confidence more than anything else. But again, we have no choice in life but to sort of go with the flow, pick up, dust off, and deal with whatever life has thrown at us. And I thought that was the worst thing that was probably going to happen. And I knew at some point, having had my previous surgery in 2005, I thought, well, I knew my pulmonary valve was on its last days anyway, but I hadn't given it too much concern until about a year later, March, April 2017. Unfortunately, I contracted endocarditis, which really, again, that shouldn't have happened scenario. And that really did not do me any favors at all. So I ended up being admitted to a local hospital fairly shortly thereafter, sent in an emergency ambulance 120 odd miles to Bristol, and few days after that, having fairly emergency surgery to try and effectively save my life. It was not one of my finer moments, but again, that was a challenge to me, because it took me so long to bounce back from that. I'd really never fallen to such a low level of fitness, and to be honest, I'd been unwell for about a month before the endocarditis. It was all kind of tied up with the same thing, but. So my fitness was already slightly low, and I really wasn't in the best sort of frame of mind or best fitness level before that happened. So then to have the surgery and effectively have 3 months in hospital, it really did kind of take me to an incredibly low level. And I had so much sympathy for people who have to start again, because that is how it felt to me. I felt like I'd gone from being a relatively fit 45-year-old, 44-year-old, to someone who was actually struggling to do regular daily activities without having a sit down afterwards. And I could cry and moan about that, or I could just say, well, this is where I am, and pick up and kind of draw that line, say this is the bottom, and build up from there. So there we go. That's a very long answer to your very short question.
No, thank you. I mean, it sounds like, you've obviously had quite a lot of ups and downs, certainly in the last few years. I want to go back into that in a little bit, but I guess you've touched on it a little bit. But when it comes to being active, what is the thing you love the most? I mean, is it the cycling or triathlons? What has sort of
anything really? I mean, I get so much from moving my body. I think you in the sort of health profession, also in the fitness world, will sympathize with that. It just makes me feel better. It makes me feel better physically. It makes me feel better mentally. And it's as much mental health for me as it is physical health. Yes, I suppose if I had to pick one activity, if somebody said you can only do one thing for the rest of your life, it would probably be cycling. But that's, it wouldn't really matter, because I just like getting out and about. At the moment, particularly since March this year, when we all got confined to barracks in this country, I took to something which has really changed my life in a positive way, which is an indoor cycling program called Zwift, which has enabled me to put my bike on a turbo trainer and ride indoors with people from all over the world. So obviously I've done away with my problems with riding through potholes and finding people who ride as slowly as I do. And I can now join groups and ride with other people and have a fairly social experience without leaving my house. Now that sounds wonderful, but on the other hand, I still believe that we have to, from a mental health point of view, it's also important to get outside. I mean, I could just shut my curtains and shut my door and never go out and ride on Zwift. But actually, from the point of view of mental health, I think it's important to also get out and walk and try and see the birds and the flowers if they're the right time of year, and dodge the rain showers. And that's part of it gives the brain, it's something fulfilling. There's something nurturing about being outside in nature. And I think even if I only had a garden and that was as far as I could go, I would still prioritize getting outside for 5-10 minutes a day, even if it was just puttering in the garden, just to actually have that outdoors time if possible. It's hard in the Northern Hemisphere. We all know that the weather is not at its best at this time of year. Yeah. But I still think the benefits of getting outside, even if I've got to bundle up and stay dry, stay warm, the benefits of getting out are still worth any challenges to do so.
And when it sort of, I guess, when you were saying about talking to your cardiologist about going running, and what sort of, I guess, got you into that? Like, why did you decide that that's what you wanted to do?
Again, I think there's part of my character that I like to explore my boundaries, and those are physical boundaries and mental boundaries, and discover which of those boundaries are things which are real and which are the ones that I've stuck up in my head as limitations, and I don't like limitations. So I suppose when I discovered that initially I went to university in this country, and I did the inevitable, or maybe it doesn't happen to everyone, but it certainly happened to me. I went from having my mother take care of me to taking care of myself, and I don't think I did the best with my nutrition at that point. I took to a rather unfortunate student diet, and my waistline got a little bigger, and my clothes didn't fit me quite as well. And I thought, well, hang on a minute. And I'd never really had trouble with maintaining my weight before that. And I thought, oh, this isn't good. And I don't know how it happened. So somewhere along the line, I probably picked up a magazine or read something that said, the best way to control your weight is to run. And I thought, well, I don't think I can do that. I'm this ADHD patient. We're not supposed to go running. But I tried it and discovered that, sure enough, I was horribly breathless and horribly unfit. And I suppose I could have said, well, that's it. I'm breathless and I'm unfit and it's my heart that's causing me the problems. But I thought, well, actually, what happens if I persevere with this? And I literally sort of ran from one lamppost to the next, and then walked to the next lamppost, run to the next one. And slowly but surely, over a period of days, weeks, and indeed months, my ability to go a little bit quicker or a little bit further increased. And I'm a very goal-orientated person anyway, and that pushed my buttons in a way. So I then found that, yes, I was slow. Yes, I wasn't as quick as maybe what we'd like to call normal people, but actually I felt I could hold my own to a certain degree. And also I started to feel better about myself. The weight never really dropped off, but it certainly slowly disappeared. And as I started investing in my fitness, I discovered that by default meant I wanted to take a bit more interest in my nutrition. So I stopped eating noodles and peas or whatever it was I'd gone off on, and started trying to maybe eat some slightly more healthy things. And I read, it's easy these days. In fact, at this point, it'd be even easier with the internet, but this was probably 92, 93, so a bit early in the internet, but there was still accessibility to more resources. And so I started reading about nutrition and started reading about exercise, and I fell into a community of people who, were similarly interested, and that really spurred me on. And my own competitive ambitions started to take over. I tried some very low-key races, and that turned, as it would with me, into longer races. And then I sort of moved to America in about that time frame as soon as I graduated, and I went and lived in South Florida, which really is the sort of mecca for year-round training, because the sun shines literally year-round.
Wow.
And I found this community of people that was very encouraging, and I felt that I belonged, and that it gave me some motivation and some encouragement maybe to push those boundaries even further and see exactly what I was capable of. Now, of course, I knew I'd had this heart problem back when I was a child, and I'd almost sort of dismissed that. I thought, well, I had that surgery at 9.5, and here I am at 20 or whatever it is. And that was somewhat of a distant memory. I'd dropped out of care, so I wasn't having follow-up anymore. And I just assumed that there was no reason why I couldn't be this athletic person. And I suppose so many of our limitations are actually in our heads. Yes, sometimes there's very physical manifestations, but equally a lot of us are held back by things that we tell ourselves. And I just took to not telling myself those stories. I decided I am capable, I can get fitter, and yes, I'm never going to be an elite athlete, but I can improve from the base level I'm at now. And that, like it would with me, it just sort of snowballed from being a fairly low level thing to being a much higher level thing. And then I moved into working professionally in that arena, and being a personal trainer and being an athletics coach. And that really did make me feel not like I'd forgotten that cardiac history, but that it was in my past.
Amazing. I mean, it's incredible to be able to do those sort of races and the endurance as well. And it's I think what I love is how you've sort of built up to it. It's, you didn't go into it thinking you were just going to be able to do it straight away, and just really build up to it and took the time and invested in your fitness for it.
And it does take time. I think one thing that the fitness world does teach you is patience. Because we all look, and I'm as guilty as the next person, of looking at these sort of pictures of people in magazines, or looking at training plans and going, oh yes, or looking even at what I can achieve now, and then naturally assuming that, oh, almost tomorrow I can do that. And of course, that's not the way that fitness works. It really is a long-term investment. It's not, you're not going to see overnight changes, and it's exactly the same with weight loss and things. You're not going to suddenly be that person that you've imagined. It's important that you imagine that person, but you have to realize there's going to be ups and downs, and it's not a linear journey to get there. And fitness teaches you that you just have to be patient, and it's the daily commitment to the small improvements that gets you to the overall goal, not trying to overly accelerate that process. You can't. You can't go from zero to hero. It's never going to be a successful tactic. You've got to revel in the little daily improvements and the little challenges, and just to keep moving forwards, and to accept that there's going to be setbacks. because that is part of life. There's going to be fitness setbacks, health setbacks, but that your only goal is to enjoy the process rather than pin everything on that goal. If you enjoy the process, the goal will take care of itself.
So on that then, I guess what has been, your biggest barrier to achieving your fitness goals?
Well, there we go. I've answered my own question by saying it really. Lack of patience has been my biggest obstacle. I'm very, very motivated. I have no trouble with motivating myself. I actually have far more trouble with listening to my body and accepting that you and I say this to my clients, and I find that I'm very good at preaching the right answer and then not necessarily taking my own medicine, which is it's not necessarily the workouts and the fitness themselves that make you stronger. Yes, you do need to challenge yourself and push yourself, but it's the rest after the challenge, which is when the body adapts. If you do it right, workouts and things, it sounds awful, and I kind of hesitate to say it, but a workout done right almost does break your body down slightly, because you need to break it down in order to rebuild it a little bit stronger. Now, I'm not talking about dramatic ups and downs, but you've got to place that challenge. But once you've placed the challenge, you've then got to back off and allow the body to catch up with what you're asking of it. If you keep asking the question and you don't allow that time for adaptation, unfortunately, it will only end one of 2 or 3 ways, which is you will get injured if you don't allow the time for the body to catch up, or you'll get sick or overly tired, or your plan will derail completely. So my problem has always been necessarily listening to those signals from my body, backing off to allow the adaptation to take place. So yes, do as I say and not as I do, unfortunately.
Well, at least you recognize it.
Yes. I know my own limitations at this point, unfortunately.
Yeah. So you've touched on sort of the more recent cardiac event you had that was a unplanned surgery. And I think when we've talked previously, you mentioned it for you didn't feel like you were actually at your peak fitness at that point. I guess, can you tell me a little bit about that recovery post-surgery and how that's perhaps compared to surgeries you had prior to that?
It was very, very different. The 2005 valve replacement, I knew that was coming. It had been pretty much on the schedule for several years. There was no great surprise. Once I'd come back from America and discovered that was the problem, I kind of fell back into care, and I knew that was coming. So I could do what I call prehab, pretty much, which was do the rehabilitation before you need to. So pre-event, pre-surgery, I'd managed to get myself, which I naturally was at that point anyway, but I'd really maintained my fitness. I'd worked incredibly hard to be as fit as I could, and so I could go into that surgery with as few limitations as possible. And I'm utterly convinced, and my consultant says he'd never known anybody bounce back quite in that way. And that was totally planned. Unfortunately, that was not the case in 2017, because I'd been unwell. I mean, I was still fit until probably I'd been Ironman training, in fact, until about the end of January. Then had been unwell. So I'd rolled on through February and into the early part of March, really hardly able to train. And then the endocarditis, which was an offshoot of the whole problem anyway. So I went into that surgery at a much lower level. Then, of course, I was effectively stuck in hospital for 3 months, which meant I couldn't really sort of get myself going again in the way I wanted to. And to be honest, I was so knocked about by that whole situation, physically and mentally indeed. But physically, I was at such a low ebb. I'd lost a huge amount of weight, and really, I guess the antibiotics that I took for 3 months really sort of pickled my system. And I just struggled to get myself going. And I realised fairly early on that I had to. I thought, well, this is 3 months where I can sit around in hospital here, feel sorry for myself and bemoan that this has ever happened, or I can actually use this 3 months to try and make some inroads into rebuilding myself. And that was hard. I made a plan. I got moved eventually from Bristol back to Plymouth, which is my nearest hospital. And that was a bit easier because I was then allowed off the ward, and I was eventually allowed to, I sort of earned permissions to go outside when I wanted to. So I set a plan to go out 3 times a day. Now, initially, I was horrified that I struggled so much to even go out the front, make it down off the ward, make it out the front door of the hospital. It was quite a reasonable sized plot the place is built on, and I discovered I could go out the front door and pretty much track the perimeter of the building and then come back in the other side. I could go 100, hang on, get my maths right here, 360 degrees and back in the front door. And I set myself a goal to go out and do that after breakfast. As I'd go and then I'd do something else in the morning until lunch. And then after lunch, I'd go out and try and circumnavigate the building again. And if the daylight allowed, I would go out and circumnavigate the building again after the evening meal. And I built that up slowly, and then occasionally I'd do a couple of laps, and then it got lucky because I discovered there was a nature reserve behind the hospital where the staff are allowed to go. You had to unfortunately go through a fog of smokers at that point, but as long as you made it through the smoky fog, you could get to the nature reserve. And then there was several acres of actually quite nice walking. So I was painfully slow. I can remember feeling almost ashamed of myself. It was not a situation I was used to. I would normally have just sort of dashed out the door and gone for a walk and not even hardly thought twice about that. But I really did have to consider, how far had I been? Did I have enough energy to get back to the door and back to my bed? But I think, you have to sort of start somewhere. And I was just utterly determined that the low level I'd fallen to was not going to be where I stayed. And again, it was slow improvements, and it wasn't linear. There was days when I just felt rubbish, and I maybe didn't get out 3 times a day, or I didn't make it as far as I'd intended. But it was a slow and steady progression, and I'm a big fan of keeping a daily log. And I kept a daily log when I was in hospital in 2005, which I still have, and I kept a daily log in 2017. And it showed me that little bit of progress. I could look back if I was having a bad day or something. I could look back and go, well, actually, look where I was 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. Even though today may not have been my best day, it was still a darn sight better than where I was way back then. So I'm a firm believer in keeping that little bit of accountability to yourself, and being able to look back and celebrate the small achievements. We're very good, or at least I'm very good, at being very judgmental and saying, oh no, I'm not where I want to be. But actually, sometimes we're a whole lot better off than we think if we're just kind to ourselves.
And so I guess where, certainly now and also in that recovery, where did your sort of strength come from, do you think, to sort of get back up and start training again? I mean, if you had 3 months in hospital, then suddenly getting back into training must have been, real challenge.
It was, and it was sort of re-establishing of my identity as well, because I'd always really been Beth, the personal trainer, Beth, I use the term athlete rather loosely, but Beth the athlete. And then here I was as this real shadow of myself and shadow of the person that I kind of thought I needed to be. And again, full circle, I had to be kind to myself and realize and accept that this was my situation right now. But the strength maybe came from the belief that I knew I could be better. I wasn't looking for, I sort of rationalized I potentially wasn't going to go back to being a high level athlete. And I sort of just appreciated that the only daily goal was to celebrate the process and not maybe set myself too high an ambition. I didn't want to set myself such big goals that I then couldn't reach them. Then I'd be demoralized. Then I'd never really make progress. The answer was to set, even if there was a bigger goal, was to break that down into something really small. And I said, those daily circuits in the hospital, that was important, because that, even though it seems laughable to me now when I visit the hospital that I actually struggled to walk once around the building. But at that point, to see that daily achievement, it gave me a sense of empowerment and a sense of almost pride that I could do that. And so once I'd achieved smaller goals, that gives me inner energy to keep setting slightly more challenging goals. Now, again, I'm famous for setting fairly big goals and then potentially struggling to achieve them, but I'm rarely defeated. And I've learned that sometimes the answer is I may just have to adjust my time frame. I rarely take a goal that I've set myself off the agenda completely. If I realize I've gone too far, I don't take the goal away completely, but potentially rather than saying I'm going to achieve this in the next month, I will say to myself, I'm going to achieve it in the next 3 months. So I've just adjusted the time frame, which gives me an opportunity to have up and down days, but to still keep the overall goal in mind and to not maybe put quite so much pressure on. That inner strength that I have, I think I've nurtured over many, many years. And obviously from my story, there's been many, many ups and downs. But actually, I realise and I heard this said on a podcast the other day, and it struck me as being totally amusing, but totally true. I have 100% survival rate at this point. No matter what has been thrown at me, I'm still here. So therefore, that gives me actually great hope and encouragement that if I just keep moving forwards, keep those small goals or bigger goals in mind, and just take daily achievements and celebrate them, and then think, now I've done that today, what would I like to do tomorrow? And just maybe draw my vision in a little bit further so that I'm not looking too far ahead. My only interest is how good can I be today, rather than sort of setting things that are just too out of control or too ambitious. How good can I be today with what the energy I've got today? What can I do with it, allowing enough time for recovery? And then I'll deal with tomorrow and the day after and the day after when I get there.
Amazing. I mean, we've covered so much in this just, one short episode, and it's incredible to sort of hear your story. I guess as a final sort of wrap up question, as a fitness professional, health and fitness professional, and someone who's got a congenital heart defect, is there any sort of advice for those that want to be active and move with CHD that you would have?
Absolutely. I think we've kind of covered some of it. I have to give the obvious disclaimer first, which is, when people ask me, and they do all the time, say, I'd like to start, what should I do? I will say, well, first of all, get clearance from your consultant, or at least a medical professional, hopefully, who's going to tell you if there's any real caveats, things you should not do. And then set yourself those small achievable goals. I think one of the problems in modern life in general, in fact, not just with CHD, is that we can try and go from zero to hero rather too quickly. And we're approaching that unfortunate time of year, and we all know it, in January, when everybody goes off on their health and fitness kicks and says, I'm going to be better this year than last year. And I used to see it all the time in the gyms, that people would go from being relative non-exercisers, and I'm not just talking about CHD patients here, everybody, it's a problem we all have, relative non-exercisers, take on a gym membership or start a running program or start a walking program, and all of a sudden they've gone from nothing to sort of 3, 4, 5, 6 consecutive days, and then wonder why they feel so terrible. And why it wasn't supposed to be like this. I was supposed to feel great, and I was suddenly going to have a size 8 figure, and it's not happening. And then they get demoralized because they fail to sort of get the level of progress they thought. And of course, and then I used to see it in the gym all the time, it was busy as anything for the first 3 weeks of January, and then all of a sudden it was half empty again, because those poor people had kind of gone over the top and given up. Whereas actually, if you say to yourself, and I'm an absolute lover for people who start and say, I'm going to go every other day or every third day, or set the bar lower than you think you can achieve to start with, rather than setting this incredibly high bar that you're almost certain to not be able to get over, set the bar lower than you think you can. Say, I'm going to walk for 5 minutes 3 times a week. And then you'll build momentum from that low level. It's better to do that than set the bar too high and then not achieve it, give up, and be nowhere in a month's time. Set the bar low, achieve, then build from there. And that's probably my number one piece of advice, apart from getting the clearance, is make sure this is really achievable. Find friends if you can. And it's hard, we know, as congenital patients, you say, I'm too slow, nobody wants to walk with me, etc. If you can, find some friends, even an online community of people who will offer you a bit of encouragement, preferably in real life, so that you get that little bit of encouragement and accountability. I know from my experience that if I sort of say I was going to do a workout, let's take today. I was going to get up this morning, go for a walk. As it was, I didn't go for my walk until about 1:30. Well, that's because I was procrastinating this morning. If I'd said I'm going to go for my walk at 10:30 and I'd been meeting a friend, I guarantee I would have been there at 10:30. So sometimes we have to build in methodologies to help ourselves. And having some friends, or having someone who says, did you get your workout done today? Did you go for your walk? That can really help. Finding a system to track things. As I said, I was a believer when I was in hospital, and I do all the time now. I still write down my workouts every day, because that gives me a sense of achievement and a sense that I'm making progress, and I can look and adjust. And I think that's really valuable, to keep some form of log. People these days love fitness trackers. I think they're great. I don't care whether they're accurate to a degree or not. People, this one's better. It doesn't matter. Get yourself a pedometer, or better still, one of these fitness trackers, because it's so motivating to watch that little bar graph on the screen and to try and think, oh, I must get out there, because last week I got an X coloured blob, and this week I need to make sure I still achieve that colour, or whatever. And are you getting your 10,000 steps a day, or your goal, your 4,000, 5,000, whatever it is? It really helps to keep you motivated. So there we go. That was probably more than 1 or 2 tips, but that's the ones you've got for you today.
No, I love it. I mean, I think some of the, the highlights of those were, setting your goals, getting yourself some quick wins in there as well with those goals. And I love the idea of bringing in a bit of a social aspect, with social distancing as we are now, but bringing in that community element and making sure you've got someone who's helping you do that and do it with you as well. I think especially, as we're go into the new year, you also find there's plenty of people who want to sort of get a bit more active as well. So finding a buddy.
And the nice thing as patients, as ACHD patients, is there's actually now some online sort of communities available. So whereas we may say we can't find another ACHD patient locally, and I don't believe you have to, incidentally, but you may find that you can slot into some of the online communities where people really do have that shared experience, and they can offer their advice and their encouragement. We all want to belong to a tribe, and of course maybe this ACHD tribe is one that we wouldn't necessarily have wanted to put ourselves in, but now we're in it, you'll discover it's the most amazing community of people with a shared history and a real desire actually to help each other, and nothing better than having help from someone who understands how you feel.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you so much, Beth. I mean, this has been fantastic to speak to you today, and really, really excited to have had the chance to share your story.
No, thank you, Hayley. It's been an absolute honour, and I look forward to maybe the opportunity for a part 2 at some point.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you've not already, please help us get the word out to fellow CHDers by sharing with your network, subscribing to the Moving with CHD YouTube channel or podcast series on your favourite streaming platform. You can also stay up to date on all the latest episodes on my Instagram @Hayley.heartfitness.